Sex. It's not that deep. Everything love, lust and life.
Sex. We talk about it so you can get better at it. We can all get better at it and maybe feel a bit happier in the process. It's not that deep. Or is it?
Hi and welcome to the most recent episode of Sex. It's not that deep. Today we're talking about kinks. This is called Everything's a Kink. I'm with my good friends Andy and Fran who are married and we are going to discuss all kinds of kinks. I'm dying to ask you guys if you're willing to share. Do you have any kinks that you'd like to share with me and the rest of the world?
Go, Fran.
I mean, I have so I suppose I have the rape fantasy one, which I think is a really common one for a woman. I like it to be within safe bounds, but I like that element of sort of, I don't know, fear, and it's a dominance thing, isn't it, really, to be? And we do have sort of sub-dom type things that we do, but
just to clarify, which way around is that?
Both ways. We both sort of switch. And I've tried things with food as well. But not recently. Not when I was younger, especially. But not so much. Go on then, you.
Saying it with a smack. I would describe myself as quite kinky. I quite like clothes and not necessarily dressing up. So the traditional one is that you'd be wearing a French maid's outfit or schoolgirl outfit or something like that. That doesn't really do it for me. But, you know, if you're like in your gym stuff, I find that quite sexy, and I quite like it if you wear that when we're having sex. That does it for me. That's just one little thing. You said about sort of dom and sub, and we switch, and we do switch a lot because I quite like being in control of you and quite forceful. And then conversely, I like it when you beat the shit out of me as well. So it sort of goes both ways in that, and I think we complement each other quite well with things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there's lots more. I'm sure we'll probably come on to them as we go. But
you've bought me shoes as well, like the kickers that you bought, because they're like school shoes from when we were younger.
Yeah,
when we were sort of 16, 17, weren't you? And all the girls that you thought were hot, I suppose, were in them.
Yeah.
You know, the big chunky ones from the 90s.
Yeah.
And I think you do sort of this in the same way that you have nostalgia for like old sweets and old things like that. You get the same thing for like your first sexual experiences, I think, as well.
Well, I was going to touch on this in a bit more detail later, probably, but it's worth mentioning there that what I've found with myself is that, you know, my kinks have changed over time. So things that did it for me 20 years ago, or maybe not long ago, have changed over time.
Yeah.
And I sort of always picking up new ones and sort of discarding older ones. So when you said there about the shoes, like the kicker shoes, it was a thing that I associate with back then when you sort of at your height of everything's new and everything's sexual when you're a teenager and the hormones are flying. That I obviously associated them with that period, and now, whilst the shoes at that point weren't particularly did anything for me, with a bit of nostalgia, they kind of do now.
I'm quite into clothes in general. I like to dress up, which is why I like to go to Soldier Garden. Yeah. And I like, sort of really elaborate clothes as well. I think I'm quite into showing you outfits, aren't I? In general, I find that quite it's less of a turn on and more of a, I think it just makes you feel sexy.
Yeah, like an empowerment thing.
Yeah, and then if I wear a really sexy costume, I really do feel different and become a different person. I mean, I made latex clothes as a business when I was younger. So, I mean, it started with, I liked the feel of latex, but I was a student and couldn't afford it, so I made it.
Yeah. And
then I sort of got more and more into it at the time. But that, I mean, it's something I'm quite happy to wear now, but it's not particularly a kink anymore. So it does show that over time you do sort of change.
Yeah.
Largely because I've got massive tattoos everywhere, so I want to get them out instead of covering them up in latex.
Yeah. So on doing this research, I found out quite a lot of things, which I'm excited to share. So a kink and a fetish are very different. A kink is a broad term that includes different sexual interests beside the same old missionary sex, while a fetish is a sexual fixation on an action or an object that is absolutely necessary during sex. So I thought that's quite interesting, seeing the two different layouts there, because people often sort of talk about foot fetishes and stuff, which I think is actually relatively common. And I guess a fetish is something that is necessary for somebody to be turned on during sex, whereas a kink is something that's just that they get off to, they like, they enjoy.
So I suppose we're kinky rather than fetishists.
Yeah, I can totally get that, because if you say like shoes as an example or clothing, for me, it heightens the whole thing if you're wearing an item of clothing or something that I find a turn on. But I'm not like fixated on it. It's not like I couldn't. We couldn't do it unless you were wearing that, and I suppose that's where the difference is. And I'm guessing probably a lot of
kind of seasoning to the dish.
Yeah, you love your food analogies for sex.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah. I'm slightly focused on that. Maybe that's my fetish.
You need to do this after lunch, not before.
So like I said, I learned a load from this. Maybe we should talk about the psychology of this first, because something that always interested me was how kinks related to, just as you guys said about your past experiences and how that links to now, how kinks related to your sort of your history, your childhood, things like that. So, if you look at the Freudian theory about how we have a repressed side of ourselves, that our morals are sort of what society says shuts that down a little bit, and then you keep it hidden, and that creates a lot of anxiety, etc., etc. So for me, it's like all that repressed things, which is why I love talking about this, because I think for me in particular, I've definitely repressed my weird kinks, because I was like, oh no, can't think like that. Just like I guess with your rape kink, it's like, oh, that's not. It doesn't feel necessarily.
Well, it's outside of a societal norm, and it's really far out there that you feel like you can't talk about it, and it can't be a thing. And I think actually a lot of people, if they just explore things like that in a kind of safer, more accepting setting, probably have a lot of things that they would really get something out of, without it being such a big thing. You're saying about foot fetishes being a big thing. I think there's a lot of people, and there's a lot of shame around that kind of thing as well. How can I like that kind of thing, and how can it be a good thing, sort of thing. And a lot of people end up repressing that, whereas actually, if there's a lot more acceptance of it, like, it's perfectly normal.
And even I found it quite hard, like, reading through these lists of kinks and keeping myself non-judgmental, because some of them are very extreme from what I would have expected. And I was like, how can I approach this topic and do a podcast on this and not sound really judgy? Because inside I feel really judgy about it, even though my own kinks might appear, they're very boring, might appear judgy to other people, I don't know. So yeah, it's interesting. So here's a really decent survey that was done that talks about the top kinks. So 37%.
Just for that, this absolutely definitely isn't just something you've researched, is it? This isn't your secret list of kinks.
This isn't my secret list of kinks. Okay, well, I'll tell you my list of kinks, because I found the name for them. So we talked about one the other week. I don't know if it was in a podcast episode or outside of it, but it's where I like the concept of watching other people get turned on by watching other people have sex. So it's like voyeurism within voyeurism.
Hey.
But there is no name for it. I've researched it to try and find a name.
That's cool. Yeah, no, I like that too.
I've done it when we've been at
watching other
clubs.
People.
I've watched. You sort of observe the room sometimes. There may be people having sex in a room with lots of other people, and I find it interesting. Maybe not. I don't know if I get turned on by it, but I find it interesting to watch the people that aren't the centre of the attention. To see what they're doing.
Actually, so this is one of the things I've always loved about going to Torture Garden, actually, is not only just seeing people in their outfits, but seeing with crowd watching.
Yeah.
I like watching people interacting with each other and interacting with the room, I suppose. And I can get that. I totally do get that.
I just generally like watching people get turned on. I'm not necessarily that bothered about watching people have sex. Like, that doesn't really interest me. But watching people get turned on, particularly by them watching other people have sex, it's just...
I get that.
It's so complex. And it's only from having these discussions that I've really been able to verbalise that.
Because it's almost like you're living vicariously through them.
Yeah.
Like, you're getting turned on by watching them get turned on.
Yeah.
It's a kind of chain reaction thing.
Yeah. I don't really know what it is, but it's fascinating. And the other thing that I don't know if really is necessarily a kink, but I know that, well, I found a name for it, if it is. I know that when, like, so I have a feather, like, lampshade in my bedroom that I just thought, oh, it's girly, yay. And then there have been occasions where I've been having sex and I see it and I'm suddenly like, oh my God, feathers. And I was like, what? And apparently it's a thing. An arousal to being tickled by feathers is called pteronophilia. But I don't necessarily know that it's being tickled by or just thinking of the texture of a feather against your skin really gets to me.
Did you know that I'm sure I got this on a TikTok, that your tongue knows the feeling of everything without whether you've actually touched it or not? I just wonder whether that kind of...
Well, that would link to Freud.
Knowing the
Freud
feeling.
and oral stimulation is a big one. So, could be that. I'm very into Freud.
So again, back to the textures sort of thing.
But that's the only ones I've really been able to give a name to in terms of...
Never thought of names.
Things that I've played out, like in... Most of it's things I've played out in my head rather than things I've played out in real life. Like with your case as well. A lot of things that actually turn me on when I am masturbating by myself are not things that I could practice in real life. They're just things that really get to me outside of that.
Also, things like, for instance, with that fantasy, I know that if I was in real life, there actually would be, unless it was with us, if it was actually playing out in real life, it wouldn't be like
sexy. Yeah.
No, it would be scary, not sexy.
Yeah.
And I like that safe fear idea, but not real fear.
Yeah.
I think that's the problem. I think you have to make it real, but not too real.
Yeah. So I'll get onto my stats if everybody's ready. So top kinks in the survey, 37% of people were into BDSM, which I actually didn't know what it stood for. It stands for bondage, dominance, sadism, or I don't know how you say it, sadism, which is sexual gratification from inflicting pain, machoism,
Masochism.
There we go. That's sexual gratification from receiving pain. 32% of people were into choking or breath play. 16% were role play. 3.6% were feet. 2.8% was cuckolding, which is people who fantasize about their partners having sex with someone else whilst they watched. 2.5% is piss and scat. This is the one I really struggle to not be judgmental about. Another 2.1% is furries. So this is something I stumbled across on the internet, which I had no idea existed. So this is somebody with an interest, and it had really different definitions. So somebody with an interest in anthropomorphized animals. That is, animals who've been given human characteristics like an ability to talk or walk on their hind legs. For example, having sex in animal costumes or dressing up like an animal and acting like an animal whilst being a human.
Any people who do that? People who do it as dogs and as horses. Pony play is quite a big one.
Right. Then following that is spanking. DDLG, which stands for Daddy Dom Little Girl. Another one that I feel questionable about. And then following that is pegging. What are our thoughts?
We fit into a lot of those, apparently.
I was sort of mentally ticking a lot of
like,
those off.
Yeah, it was just like,
there was a couple of notable ones that I left the box blank, but
yeah, we've got no interest whatsoever in scat, for instance.
No,
but that's just each to their own.
People, yeah, and I used to know, sort of in the industry that I was in a little while ago, a lot of people like the high heels, like being walked on with high heels.
Yeah,
which
trampled.
Yeah, doesn't fit into that, but I've got some more to show you in a bit anyway. So 33% of women said that their sex involved theirs or their partner's kinks more than half the time, compared to 25% of men and 30% of non-binary people. Do you think your sex life involves your kinks?
Yeah, a lot of the time. And we've done it more as we've gone along as well.
That makes sense, though, as we've got to know each other better and
opened
understand each other better.
Yeah.
Over the years, it's natural that you start to introduce them. I can well understand people not exploring it, because even now, after 11 years of marriage, we still, occasionally one of us will drop in oh yeah, I quite like this, and it's like,
yeah,
again, probably quite liked it for a decade, but I've never really wanted to drop that in there.
Again, that comes back to the communication again. Having those sort of pillow talks about what would you like to try, not in sex itself, or not even the as a prelude to let's try it now, just
Yeah.
as a what would you like to try in the future is really handy.
Yeah.
And you've come out with things. I mean, like we've tried the choking thing. We quite like that one. And BDSM in general, we've tried a few things. Things like the latex, though, has really died down largely because we can't be asked. It takes a lot of time and a lot of pre-preparation. But
I think a lot of it
we've got simpler with things.
with BDSM as well. That the image that conjures up for a lot of people is the whole 50 Shades of Grey and whips and chains, and we're really not interested in that side of it
Use whips
at all, really.
No.
But like you say, like choking, I like choking. I like seeing the reaction of when I do that to you. I'd like you to do it to me, but I'm so fucking ticklish that I start laughing and it just
Seriously, it
can't last
really ruins the
seconds.
mood. You're gonna have to bear down on him like some sort of,
I remember once
like you're attacking
I remember
him.
once in the motor, I went, choke me, and he did it, and I just started giggling like a girl immediately. Couldn't deal with it.
See, I think with kinks, it's like you guys obviously are quite comfortable with yours, and like you said, it's been like 11 years, and there's still things that come up. It's definitely something for me that is very, very new, and not necessarily because I don't feel confident talking about it, but more because I haven't quite established that it is a kink. I'm just like, oh, that's weird that I was turned on by that.
I
just
grew
sort of
up
leave
around
it.
kinky people though, so for me,
Yeah.
kinks, not necessarily me having kinks, but seeing kinks and being accepting of kinks has always been a thing.
Yeah.
For instance, a lot of the people that I knew when I was sort of 18, 19, there was a lot of like sissies, so people who dress up as little girls, and things like that are quite taboo kind of kinks.
Yeah.
That just was normal to me. So just accepting things like that's generally fairly natural. But then bringing that into my life has taken a lot more, trying things out. I think there is an element of, is this other person going to be okay with that? Am I okay with that?
Am I okay with that? That's it.
Is this something to be ashamed of? Is this something that is wrong?
Yeah.
Almost. I think there's a lot of those questions that you ask yourself before you sort of relax into it.
Journey of like learning about yourself, I think, and that's hard to do. I think on your own.
Yeah.
When it comes to kinks,
but almost you kind of have to have complete trust in someone to do it with them as well. And I think that complete trust is quite hard to find in relationships early on. So.
Yeah, and I think slightly sort of going off topic a little bit, but you can have people who maybe think, well, if they're interested in stuff outside of me, then that's not necessarily jealousy, but sort of, is their kink a distraction from me in the relationship, in the sexual experience? Do you know what I'm saying?
That's what you're saying about cuckolding and involving other people in sex. I think that's the hardest thing to overcome with a couple, is that's having sex with someone else whilst the other person's watching. That's quite a big departure from normal sex as a couple, and I think there's quite a lot to sort of nail down before you sort of get into that, and I think a lot of couples struggle with that.
You hear a lot of people sort of surmising of, I had a threesome once and it wasn't all it was cracked up to be.
Yeah,
I've heard that a lot.
I've heard that a lot.
Was like, it just wasn't what I expected, and then people probably never revisit that.
Also, I think you've got to, if you're going to do something like that, I think you've got to pick your partners, sort of thing. It's not just about picking people who are hot, it's people who would gel with you sexually, and that's different.
Sexual compatibility is such a fine-tuned thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really.
Well, it's hard to nail that down with two people. You add a third or a fourth person into the mix. There's a lot of variables there.
And there's things like jealousy as well that can come into it. And then if you've also got like hang-ups or, insecurities as well, you're adding all of that into the pot, which is just making it harder.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is something we've explored as we've, fairly recently, only really this year or so, last year or two. And yeah, we've seen other people on that journey as well. And it's interesting to see, you can spot people who are struggling with it.
Yeah.
But I don't yet know how you can help them. I think probably the communication is the thing.
I think it's something you have to work through as a pair, isn't it? You have to work and be honest. We've spoken to people in that environment who are clearly not necessarily ready to be exploring that quite so in such a detailed way, and they need to work up to it a lot more. Whereas we, as we often are with things, we're a little bit more jumping with both feet, and we'll
dive in and see what happens.
Yeah.
And sort it all out afterwards, don't we?
It's interesting you say that, because there's some stats here on sort of being able to communicate your kinks with partners. So this looked into 2,000 American sex lives. 40% claimed themselves to be kinky people. 36% had a specific kink or fetish, whilst 27% of Americans in a relationship have a secret sex act they want to try but haven't asked their partner yet. Using sex toys is the most popular sex act, with 49%, nearly 1 in 2 Americans open to this. 51% of those who admitted to having a particular fetish said that it takes at least a month and often longer for them to feel brave enough about telling a partner. I can imagine it takes longer than that, really.
Well, especially if you're saying that before that people don't actually talk about sex that much at all.
Yeah.
So I imagine, you're saying that some couples only talk about sex once a year. So I imagine...
I know, yeah.
If you're only having that discussion once a year, the time for it to come round is...
I think it's so sad to think of people that are, hiding this kink that they've got.
The true needs.
Possibly even for a lifetime, and never really exploring it, never really talking about
But
it.
then your sexual needs are not being met.
Yeah. But I can understand that can happen, because I think back to when I was younger, growing up. I can remember once I said before, I had a thing for shoes and that and feet, and it just sort of was something that started to build on sort of a teenager and that. And I can remember once, I sort of looked down in a pub or a club or something, because somebody walked past and was like, oh, that's really hot. Just had a quick glance, and one of my mates noticed, and I got ripped for weeks about it. No, I couldn't. We couldn't be in a public place and a woman walked past with a pair of high heels on without my mates nudging me and winding me up. And then it's just something just sort of on the surface. You deny it, you repress it, instead of embracing it and saying, yeah, damn right.
It took you a long time to talk to me about it as well. And it took us even longer to explore it together as well. We've only just really been doing that. And it's not something I thought I had as a fetish or a kink or even. But as soon as you start doing something that you both that the other person enjoys, I found that actually I start to enjoy it, and it's starting to turn me on as well. And then it's sort of a build up, and I can see how that could quite easily snowball into an actual fetish.
And that's why everything can be a kink, because like I say, things changed for me over the years, where things that I were not interested in a long time ago now are. And then things that we've tried together or you've suggested has become something that's a really strong feeling for me when we do it.
I think, the idea of turning you on turns me on, but then that becomes the act as well. So now for me, the whole thing is a kink that I really enjoy, just initially just because I enjoyed turning you on with it. And I think that's the other thing, that you can enjoy things that you don't think that you would enjoy if you just give them a try.
And just going back to what Andy said then about having your whole life not expressing your kinks and things like that, imagine how much resentment could then build up, either to yourself in terms of, why have I got this need? Why can't I really enjoy sex without this? Or to the other person, why won't they enjoy it with me? Why don't I feel comfortable enough to discuss this with them? And that's just going to affect your whole relationship in general. Yeah. But it is still so taboo. Like, I feel quite uncomfortable talking about it, but this is what this podcast is about, in the whole aspect of kinks, because they are things that you can't talk about, I guess.
I think also there's a lot of people who probably don't know that they have one until they try it.
Yeah.
And whether it's denial or whether it's just not knowing that you've got it because you've not tried it. I think there's an awful lot to be said with sex, just throwing everything at a wall and seeing what sticks.
Yeah.
That actually...
food.
Sorry, I've gone back. I don't... Well, maybe try that. Maybe that's your kink. Maybe that's my kink. I just don't know yet. But I think there's a lot to be said for just try everything. I used to have a motto that I'll try anything once.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good way with sex to at least start exploring things. But like you said earlier, trying some things once, especially if you're really young, probably certain things you do have to be older to enjoy. I think BDSM generally you get better at as you get older. Things like threesomes and stuff, you're probably going to be getting better at as you're more secure as an older adult. there's not that many very secure young couples that we've ever met in that kind of scene. And I think there's a lot of things that you maybe, rather than just try it once, maybe revisit it with a different partner or revisit it in a different way. I mean, I heard something on another podcast about trying BDSM and thinking that, you know, you should immediately go out and buy a whip and start whipping each other. And I was like, that's like going in at level 6 sort of thing, when actually you should be trying levels 1, 2 and 3 sort of thing. And that actually, if you've gone at it the wrong way, you've probably missed out on a kink that you might have just by overdoing it, basically.
I love hearing about like really weird kinks as well, because I find it quite empowering, because then there's all, whatever you're harbouring inside, whatever you're trying to repress, there's always something weirder. I heard something on another podcast recently, or just on social media, and it was a woman talking about sharing a kink that she had, and you could hear the relief in her voice to be talking about it. And what it was is that she could only get off if she was masturbating if she was watching a video of childbirth, really gory video. And then on the back of that, so many people then sort of messaged in saying, I've got the exact same thing, I thought it was the only one. And you can always see this wave of relief, and it was quite graphic. That was the only way they could get off, was to watch a video of childbirth. And I remember it stuck in my mind because I don't think any of them had given birth, which is, you know, there's probably a good reason for that. It probably doesn't have a great,
it's not all that sexy.
Great feelings associated to it, but that was really interesting how it was. You could just sort of sense even just, you know, through a phone screen and a
Imagine
microphone.
not knowing all those other people exist.
Yeah.
And then, again, this is another thing. We should talk about sex more, so that if we've got those weird, really niche down kinks that we think absolutely no one knows about, and no one ever could do it, have the same kink, then you can find out, actually, no, you're not that weird. That actually,
Yeah.
and even if you are that weird, there's still other people who have the same thing.
So here's a list of kinks from Ireland, which I don't know why this came up, but I thought it was quite interesting. And this is all in sort of order of preference. So sex outdoors, particularly on a beach, is a main one for women, followed by blindfold sex, role plays in there, filming each other having sex, DIY porn, food sex play, being tied up. And for men, it's the same, but role play comes much higher up, particularly with uniforms. Bondage is more spanking and whips. Sex outdoors is a little bit further along. Threesomes is one for men that isn't for women. And blindfold sex there as well. And then this is my favourite list here. So this is a list of, they call them paraphilias, is like the official name. And if anybody's interested, there are hundreds on Wiki, which have actually been classified by the DSM, who do a lot of the sort of psychiatric diagnosis and things like that. So we've got on there a statues and mannequins kink, a flatulence kink, crawled on and in by insects, turning a human being into a piece of furniture, getting enemas, breast milk. So this is one that I want to talk about because it's actually called adult nursing, is the actual kink itself. So I know about this because I'm actually in the process of inducing lactation without pregnancy, without hormones. It's like a random natural procedure that people can do themselves with just like pumping, basically. And something called the Marmot massage. Anyway, there weren't, as you can imagine, very many support groups for this particular setup, because for me it was never like a sexual thing. It was for like health, and just I did lots of research into hormone balancing, and it has done exactly what I wanted to do. But the groups that you find are adult nursing groups. So on these induced lactation groups, it's loads of people who sort of message me, like when I'm asking a question about timing or the technique or whatever, then they'll message me like, oh, are you interested? You know, they'll try and advertise themselves, basically. And what the interest is in is they want to sit in your lap and I really don't like the actual terminology, guzzle from your bosoms.
Nursing.
Yes. But it's guzzling is it's not a word I feel comfortable with. So I just never thought that even existed prior to this group.
Well, you think about, there's a lot of psychology behind wanting to go back to being a baby.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of sexual things around being babies. I know a couple of adult baby people,
yeah,
from way back when, and I think it's something a lot of people if they know that they like that, they get really into it. It's not like a kink that you just have, here's another thing I do. This is one of those like really deep into it kind of kinks. Like if you're into it, you're proper into it.
Almost like a lifestyle rather than just a
Yeah.
fleeting thing.
Yeah. And I think it's kind of quite a natural thing if you think about it.
Yeah, and if you look at, I did look into the psychology side of this. So the adult baby diaper lovers, called ABDL, is the terminology there. So apparently a number of studies show people who practice BDSM have a higher level of socio-economic functioning compared to control groups. The literature is limited, but it would suggest that they're healthy or healthier. And ABDL, the adult baby diaper lovers, behaviours were associated with attachment styles and parental relationships. So that side of things is more, like you said, the psychology of what they didn't have when they were kids or when they were growing up, or what they lacked or what they had too much of in terms of parents being there or not being there, and sort of the attachment issues, anxious attached and avoidant attached and things like that. So there is some science behind it, which is really interesting.
I think most kinks are a response to something we were lacking, or something that we're looking for, or some kind of self-soothing method. If you're really rich and powerful, quite often you find that those sorts of people like to be really dominated. And I think it's just us searching for another release for that thing that we're missing, but we don't really consciously know it.
Yeah.
I think it's more of a subconscious thing. And we're just sort of soothing our subconsciousness.
Yeah.
It's all very deep and...
I know, but that's it though, isn't it? How do we...
physically, we're
Yeah.
making ourselves feel better, and it sort of ties in with the sexual side of it, which is all about making yourself feel good. And it's just making yourself feel good as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to carry on my list because it's going to wow you even more. So some people like giants. I don't know how they'd put that into play in real life. Armpits, cars, which I've seen quite a lot on social media, which stresses me out a bit. Smells from the body, which I think would be awesome if somebody got turned on by weird smells coming from your body. Just wouldn't ever have to worry about it. You're like, all right.
I get that, because that's quite authentic, isn't it?
That's quite a common one, isn't it?
If it's a smell created by the body. But also, smell's really important, because there's certain perfumes or aftershaves. If I happen to pass somebody and I smell it, I'm like, my God, that takes me back a decade. I can remember this person.
So smells are a really strong part of the brain that we don't utilise that much as well.
When if a man walks past with a really nice aftershave on, that scene in Nemo when that shark smells blood and his eyes go wide.
Yeah,
that's what happens to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything just changes.
But then it's something you get with sort of dominatrixes and goddesses and those sorts of people selling off bits of their body. It's quite often smells is one of the things. Like people want the smell of socks or the smell of pants or the smell of sweat on clothes. It's kind of something so that you've physically got some sort of aspect of that person with you, even if they're not there. And then you get that also with couples, don't you? Like when people aren't away and people sniff their pillows and stuff to remind them.
Yeah, definitely.
Does that make sense, that one?
Yeah, some of these won't. So wetting yourself and the thought of other people wetting themselves.
That's just an extension of the scat and urine sort of fetish.
Maybe it's to do with like the need and
control.
Yeah.
Actually, I kind of, in a way, get that, because when you really need to go,
as
it does feel really good.
It could be multi-layered though, because it could also be a humiliation.
Also
thing.
Humiliation.
I mean, I speak for myself. I don't know about all guys, but if you're having sex and you burst in for a pee, it feels so much better.
Mm.
Yeah, that's true as a woman, I think, as well.
Yeah.
It's a bit terrifying, but also exciting.
Also, if you've ever had an experience where you've been really embarrassed by it or something, taking that sort of power back from it, is probably quite nice feeling.
So this is one that's confused me. Persons, typically female, needing assistance with automobiles. Is it? So women who need help with cars. It sounds more like a porn scene than anything else.
Porn, yeah.
But apparently it's kink. It's got an official name in the DSM.
I can get that though, because again, it's all about the brain, isn't it? It's about that being in that scenario, even if
wanting
nothing
to be
happens.
the hero.
Yeah,
is that what it is?
The scenario thing rather than a
physical thing. It feels like so specific.
I think what's really interesting in a lot of these as well. We've talked before many times about sex sex is traditionally always you start and then often the guy or the woman comes and then that's it.
Yeah.
A lot of these things don't necessarily lend themselves to involving the genitals at all, especially
No.
when you go back to like the nursing and things like that.
Yeah.
And
It's all about the
non-traditional.
process,
Yeah,
isn't it?
Absolutely. That's what I like about this. High heels, I think we've touched on before. Getting messy with mud and slime. Arousal to the sun's rays, which is a new one. Haven't heard of that before. Arousal to caverns, crevices and valleys. I don't know how you'd play that in,
No.
but interesting. Arousal to falling downstairs. Arousal to stone and gravel. Arousal to sucking on a person's nose. I've heard of that before, actually. Arousal to bees and wasps. Absolutely would never happen for me. I'm terrified of insects. Arousal to being cold and watching others who are cold. And then my personal favourite, arousal to the thought of hellfire and damnation.
Yeah, that's a big one of mine. That.
I can kind of get the cold one actually, because again, that's sort of an extension from being outdoors, and that feeling of it across your skin.
Yeah.
I kind of get that to a degree, but I think I'd have to be in the mood for that kind of thing to work. I couldn't see that would do it in itself.
Yeah.
I suppose it's just flipping a lot of these scenarios on its head. The thing gives you the horn rather than you do the thing once you've got the horn. I think that's probably more of the thing with kinks there. And I think it's really cool that there's such an expansion of sex there that is completely outside of the bedroom and outside of normal man and woman does this one thing sort of thing.
Absolutely. So I think we should dive into this a bit more in terms of it does. And I had a conversation with my partner about this, like after we did part 1 of this episode. It does open up sex outside of the orgasm, outside of the erection, to the intimacy and the specific things that are you.
Some of them are quite sweet in a way, I think.
Yeah.
Especially some of the sort of adult baby things. I mean, if you you can take quite a cynical, sinister view of it, but some of it is just like, oh, this person really wants to be loved, looked after. And I get that, because don't we all? And actually, it's just an extension of that kind of thing.
Yeah. So what about for, like, maybe for men who, I don't know if it's necessarily the case for you, Andy, but I know that it can be quite common for men to feel like they have to, stay erect the whole way through and perform, and that sort of performance anxiety then leads them to not be able to extend outside of the way sex works. And do you know what I'm saying? Like they don't feel like they can do anything else during sex because it'll be too much of a distraction, and they'll lose the erection, and then do you know what I'm saying? Would that be something that has ever come up for you?
Certainly the anxiety around remaining or maintaining a performance and the expectation. But again, that expectation is all set within the very strict confines that sex is often thought of, isn't it?
Yeah.
This is how you do it. Do different positions, you might be in a different place, but principally it's in and out, and then it's finished, isn't it? That's the way it's thought of. I think probably for a lot of people, I would guess a lot of those kinks that you've talked about there don't always necessarily even involve the genitals at all. I would imagine a lot of it is just all about the mind, isn't it, and the body, and not necessarily ending in orgasm.
It sort of takes away that kind of, especially if you've got a dysfunction in your relationship as well, you can have that intimacy and that sort of connection without any of the stress of sex. So certainly some of the things that we've tried, kinks that we've tried, tend to be outside of standard sex. We don't always go on to standard sex afterwards.
There's a vulnerability to it as well, isn't there? In revealing, often people probably repress this for a long time.
Yeah.
And maybe need to build to a really high level of confidence to tell someone. And so there's quite a vulnerability in revealing that to somebody. And that in itself is certainly a bonding thing, isn't it? If you trust somebody so much that you can open up about something, especially if they're happy to try it with you and explore it.
And massively empowering as well. I think we've found this from having these conversations on here, that you do feel so empowered being like, yeah, okay, that is something I'm into, and that's okay that I'm into that, and it's not.
And on the other side, serving that is quite empowering as well.
Yeah.
And providing something for someone. It's a nice thought to be providing some kind of sexual service through something non-sexual as well. I mean, for the kinds of people that, like, for instance, back when I used to go to fetish clubs, I used to wear ridiculous heels. I used to love foot fetishists. They will come and make your feet feel better and love doing it at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
It's a win-win from both sides of it. I used to think that they were brilliant. But it's, for me, at the time, not particularly sexual. Literally, my feet hurt, thank you, sort of thing. But for them, it's giving them something that they enjoy and is sexual for them, but without that contact and that requirement sort of for it to be two-way almost. It's quite a nice thing, I think.
So how do we broach these conversations? I think we sort of touched on this in part one a little bit. How do we broach conversations about kinks, especially for new relationships or people who haven't had these conversations before, or people who think kinks are really taboo and kinks are really bizarre and uncomfortable and they don't feel sort of safe to be able to express that? How do we take that forward?
I think quite often porn here is quite a good, look, here's this thing I found, what do you think of it, sort of thing. But also sort of the slow approach of like, here's something I quite like to try, here's something a bit further down that line, rather than, you know, if it's quite a big thing in itself, trying to break it up a bit so that it's not a huge amount in one go, you know, like I really want you to dress up as this ridiculously complex thing, rather than why don't we try, you know, a little bit more this way, and just sort of easing into it, I think.
I think it's still about finding the way of getting it into conversation, isn't it, as well?
Trust before you start as well.
Yeah, because if you're not confident enough in yourself or your relationship or your bond with that person, you can find a way of getting into the conversation, whether it is, you know, listening to a podcast, or porn, as you said, is another way of doing it. Social media, find a page or a group or a video that's relevant to it, and then, you know, let that person see it, accidentally or not, and then it's a way into that conversation.
And if they're really horrified by it, then you know that you're probably not into a winner. But it might just start the conversation. You were saying with your partner about just talking about these things have started conversations. I think if you start having those conversations, you can sort of move them onto topics that you'd really like to cover. I mean, like, it took you a while, didn't it, to sort of tell me some of the things that you'd like to do, and you sort of introduced it across a number of years, really. But as we've sort of gradually got into it more, like I said, we found that we've really enjoyed exploring them together. And it's become something that, instead of it being your thing that I'm servicing for you sort of thing, it's our thing that we're doing together, and that we both get something out of, because, like I said, originally I would get something out of it, but just seeing him happy. But now I also enjoy it together as well.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of become my kink too, just by it being something that we do together.
There's a way, you can always find a way of making it work for both people as well. Because, like, you know, you said there that the example with foot fetishists when you were younger at fetish clubs, and, you know, they're getting something great out of it, you're getting something out of it, albeit a different thing. But the other byproduct of that is that you're feeling empowered by it and feeling good about your body.
Yeah.
And whatever that kink is, whether it be nursing or dressing up or filming each other, if you know that you're turning the other person on and it's working for them, then even if sexually it's doing nothing for you, mentally it's probably doing you the world of good.
Yeah, I mean, you always left those feeling quite flattered and appreciated and prettier, I suppose, at the end of it, which is a nice thing. If you're out and you're wanting to feel that, then it does just add to the vibe, I suppose, of the night. So actually, it was a really good thing in general. And I think if we get away from shaming people for things, because at the end of the day, most things are just natural. They might be really complex things in themselves, but they're probably just a natural response to something. And like I said, we're just seeking enjoyment in the same way we go back to food again, that we seek enjoyment from particular types of food. And you can go from something quite generic down to, you know, Michelin-starred really complex. The sex is the same. It's the same sort of process. And just because you've ended up at this really complex thing doesn't mean that actually it came from this really weird place. It came from a normal place. It's just got funneled.
Well, that's it as well, I think, about when we're learning about kinks and our kinks and what works for us. It is like you mentioned in part one, BDSM doesn't have to be straight away tying you up and strapping you and whipping all of this kind of stuff. It can be smaller things, and it can start smaller. Like a food one, for example, like when I guess the first thing you think of, well, the first thing I think of, who's never done anything like that before, when I think of food kinks is, oh, they're going to, make a whole roast dinner on your whipped cream and a cherry on top. It doesn't have to be like that. It could just start off with, honey on your nipples or something. And that's like such a gentle way to ease into something.
That's what I'm saying. That I think if you try just a little bit, you might be surprised.
Yeah.
By how much kink that you actually enjoy.
Yeah.
And I think I've tried a lot of things. I mean, I've eaten food off of people. Weirdly, I didn't create the food, or particularly, they were just laid as a platter at an event one day.
Love it.
It's a bit like, it's really awkward when it's not a sexual thing. It's really awkward. But when it is a sexual thing, it's really good.
Yeah.
And we've I don't know, have we done much food?
No, we're quite food focused. We'd probably just eat it before we ever got near the sexual bit.
But I've done stuff before, and food's a nice one because I think they're quite a wholesome one. I think a lot of people, most people enjoy food, and so the enjoyment is quite similar.
Yeah.
Whereas the enjoyment from some of the weirder kinks it's harder to see that. Whereas, I like food, I like you, I like food on you. It's quite a simple solution.
And
or in you.
How do we break the taboo then of people wanting to talk about and discover their own kinks? Because it is much harder to do that. Whereas, like we've talked about before, how particularly with female masturbation, it's a lot easier to find out what works for you from a physical perspective when you're on your own. But you can't necessarily do that with kinks, because a lot of the time you do need other people or other things to be involved. And I don't know if you'd be able to find that out by yourself.
I think, again, it always comes back to communication, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And having that really open dialogue with each other.
But even then, there's the broader problem of you can have good communication with someone, but still feel inhibited, still feel ashamed that you can't express it. And it's a bigger thing, isn't it? People just got to be more comfortable around sex.
Accepting yourself as well, I think. And stop building things up. I mean, the kink isn't something to build up. Oh, I can't do that. It's a big thing. It's just another aspect of who you are and being who you are to its fullest.
Yeah.
Sort of being your authentic self is being all of those things, all those different aspects all at the same time.
But that's a common problem in life generally, isn't it? People build things up to be a bigger problem than something is. I can think back to a kink going before I met you, Fran, with somebody I was seeing at the time, and I wanted to tell them about this kink, and I built it up for ages and never said. And then eventually, when I sort of blurted it out, expecting the worst, and they were like, "Yeah, that sounds cool. Let's try it." And I'm like, fuck, I've wasted months and months and months where we could have been enjoying this, and I didn't, because I was so in myself that there'd be a problem.
Yeah, and yet when we get into those kinks, like I think we discussed in part 1, is that you do get distracted from being in your own head in sex itself, and it becomes more about the pleasure. So something I love the concept of is tantric sex, which I don't know if it's necessarily a kink or if it's just a different style of sex, and it's where it's meditative. It's not about the physical aspects, it's not about the orgasm, it's about the partnership of a couple, and like that really interests me. And I feel like in a way kinks are a lot like that. Kinks are, you're switching off of the must orgasm, must stay hard, must stay focused, must stay aroused, to being, I'm with somebody that I really care about, doing something that they're really enjoying and I'm really enjoying, and therefore we can develop our relationship even further.
I think we're too focused on boxes that we live in, and sex is another one of those boxes, and it has to be within the 4 walls of that specific thing that everyone does. And actually, if we just relaxed in life, I think we'd have a lot more fun.
Yeah.
I think that's the key, really, to it all, is just relax, stop it being such a big thing. And, sex is normal and natural, and so are all the other aspects to it. Absolutely. As long as you're not hurting anyone, or if they're consenting.
As long as they're consensually being hurt, that's fine.
Yeah, then there's no problem with it, really. I think we do get uptight. I I mean, they do. That's our reputation. British people get all uptight, and I don't think we generally are that bad with sex. But this is one of those things where I think we are quite uptight, and we don't want to be outside of the norm. But the norm isn't really actually the norm. It's just that that's what we've been told what it is. That's actually not everyone's experience of what they would like.
Yeah.
If you actually gave everybody the experience of everything and said, what do you like? What most people would choose wouldn't necessarily be what we've suddenly decided is normal.
I completely agree. So I think we've covered a lot today, and it's been a really interesting discussion. I've really enjoyed talking about this. It's just not talked about. Kinks are not talked about, and I think it's great that we've been able to talk about this. So thank you very much for listening, and we hope to see you next time on Sex It's Not That Deep. Please feel free to leave us reviews, follow us on socials, and check our website out as well. And once again, thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Sex.
It's not that deep.